Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobsource, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Yo.
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going?
Unfortunately, Reed couldn't be with us for this episode, but we will be trucking along anyway, and hopefully you can look forward to seeing him back in our next episode. Yeah. In this episode, we will be covering balance and health in formats and CDH specifically. Kind of discussing what makes a format balanced or healthy, and kind of getting into discussion surrounding that. But before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Dude, Path of Exile Siege the Atlas dropped, and it's been a wild ride.
Siege of the what is the Atlas that is being sieged?
It's kind of like Path's multiverse, pretty much.
Okay. So like the universe is being sieged.
It's being attacked. Yeah. It's pretty
How
epic.
long have you been playing Path for?
Like 10 years, I think.
Nice.
Imagine playing a single game for 10 years.
Dude.
Don't have to.
It's actually 11 years.
Although
August.
I also realized that like anyone who's been playing Minecraft for a long time, like that's like a
that
game
comes and goes in waves, right?
Yeah, but like I feel like before Minecraft, it would be very uncommon to find someone who like actually played the same game for like a decade. Like maybe the World of
like
Warcraft
Mario
people
and shit on NES and SNES. Like, dude, people were very much into that. You know, like, dude, I just play Mario all the time. Dude, that's right.
But like, I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely not.
New
It wouldn't be as
consoles
common.
and
Minecraft
new
is pretty
games and
ubiquitous. Yeah. Dude, speaking of like things that we've been doing for a long time, I was thinking about this. I think earlier today. It's like there's like I my first message on the Frog server, and which is like kind of my first kind of message in. I mean, I think it was like the same year as like my first kind of foray into like CDH Discord community was 2017. And it's like, dude, I've been in the same Discord community for like 5 years. Like, there's people in that server who are like they're in high school and shit. I'm like, dude, when I first came onto this server, like, you guys were like 11? In fucking, yeah, like, it's Jesus Christ.
Dude, I've been in the same Facebook chat ever since I got my parents on a Facebook. I don't know. Just a long community.
Dude, I've got the crow's feet are starting to like appear at my eyes, dude. You know, like the wrinkles, my hair is graying. It's no good. I probably, the thing is being on Discord makes you feel like way older because the demographic skew is so young. I'm sure that pisses off a lot of like, I know, like, because there's guys on the Discord who are like, you know, like 30, and it's like at 30 it's like, damn, you know, you're like
grandpa.
Sage it, yeah. You're so like being like, dude, I feel super old at like 25. You know, they're probably like, fuck you, dude. But yeah, no, it's wild to think about. Yeah, so I guess you've been doing some Path, and I've still been on the Master Duel type train. It's been a lot of fun to rekindle my my previous kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh stuff and learn the new format and interesting change up for Magic. So I one thing I really like about having multiple games and like, you know, maybe not just sticking with Magic for too long and kind of switching it means that every time you kind of like go between games or formats or whatever, it's like it keeps things fresh and interesting. You get to come back with new set of fresh set of eyes and kind of a renewed excitement for it. It's dope, yeah. So hopefully, you know, when I burn out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, I can. I mean, I'm still doing Magic stuff, but like, I mean, I'll and I become
Are
more.
you though?
I become more interested in just doing purely Magic. I'll have like a renewed enthusiasm.
Yeah. Nice.
Anything for you, Morgan?
Not especially. I've played a little bit of Path. It's been a while, so I'm a little rusty. But who knows?
Nice.
Maybe I'll actually, try hard this one a little bit more.
Dude, I can rush you to endgame.
No, that's exactly what I don't want.
You know,
What?
you know the meme of like the it's like some like cartoon. I think it was like a Reddit thing where it's like some cartoon like guy and then his like big friend in like the full suit of armor like carrying him.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Dude, me starting playing Path and like Matt.
The best part about that analogy is it would be the guy with the giant suit of armor being carried by the skinny little guy who just knows how to dodge everything.
I guess also, yeah, I guess since our last episode, because we did our last episode midway through spoilers, and so spoilers are done now.
Yeah,
nothing.
true.
I guess what there's a couple interesting things that have come out since our last episode, right?
Odawara wasn't shit, and I'm angry.
Yeah.
I just
Right.
wanted that card to be actually unplayable. But no. I don't know.
There's some interesting stuff like the reality chip, which is that future site. There is the clone, the something mech, right?
Yeah.
Imposter mech? Yeah.
Yep, there's the new the one that combos with Devoted Druid, the enchantment. That's kind of interesting.
Oh,
No,
what?
very
Missed
cool
that.
stuff.
Yeah, it turns it into a vehicle, but it keeps its abilities, so you can just put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it, and also tap it for mana, and also it's not a creature, so it's not affected by summoning sickness.
Yeah, easy.
So it's actually a 3-mana,
true.
2-card infinite mana combo. That's modern legal. Spicy.
Pretty dope. Yeah. So without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. And as always in housekeeping, we like to give a shout out to our new patrons. So we have one new patron this week, and we want to give a big shout out to Jeremy W. I know you guys are. It sounds like I'm going to say the thing. I'm not saying it. New year.
Yeah, me neither.
New year. I'm done with that.
Oh my god!
New-
And then 2023,
new ripoff.
he's gonna
bringing it
stop
back.
say no. He's gonna stop saying that he's not gonna say it, and we're just gonna
Yeah. And then we're just gonna.
Yeah.
It's just gonna
gracefully transition away from this.
But he is gonna go back to saying new Patreons.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. We very much appreciate it. And if you want to hear about all the things that we love our new patrons for and our existing patrons, listen to the end credits of the show. So that's housekeeping, and we also have some new developments. Morgan, I'll let you do this.
Yeah. So Ken of Stacked EDH fame put out a video where he crunched just an unreasonable amount of numbers on every card in every deck on the Decklist database. And there's some really interesting stuff that came of that, about how diverse or not diverse the meta is, how much variance there is in deck lists, how homogenous things are, it's just he's going to be sort of maintaining it as a resource moving forward, which I think is going to be pretty cool
that's super
to see how that sort of shifts over time. And it's a cool video, it's a cool document, so go check that out. We'll make sure to link that down below.
Cool. So into the main topic of the show, which, as I mentioned earlier, is balance and health of formats in general and specifically CH. So before we kind of delve into the topic, we wanted to give a brief kind of definition of health versus balance. Like, what is the difference between a balanced format and a healthy format, and how do those interact with each other? So I think a quick kind of rule of thumb comparison, really overly simplified, would be a healthy format is a fun format, and a balanced format is a fair format. And often for a format to be fun, it needs to be fair, or at least more or closer to like if a coin toss is perfectly fair because it's 50-50 or whatever. It's not that it has to be perfectly fair, but it needs to be,
it can't be too unfair.
Yeah,
is probably
exactly.
a way of putting it.
Yeah. Because certainly something that we enjoy about Magic is the variance, and that's definitely something that makes it fun, enjoyable. But yeah, it really, I think health versus balance is the fair versus fun, or fun versus fair kind of breakdown. And then one other thing that I kind of wrote down here, which is to determine, or kind of a way you could judge whether or not a format, or how healthy a format is, would be how long can you play the format before experiencing burnout. And this is kind of assuming no rotation or bannings of cards, or no new cards are being introduced into the format, because that is kind of what keeps things interesting. And formats get stale, they can get stale pretty quickly. But a healthy format will it will take a much longer to get stale before that format gets healthy, or before that format gets God, what did I say?
Unhealthy, I think.
I think
you said health. Yeah.
But yeah, so using these kinds of rules, or this kind of level of analysis, before we kind of get into the breakdown on balance versus health, even kind of more in depth, would you say that CDH is a healthy, balanced format? Can maybe not that it's without its flaws, not that it's not without its flaws, but like compared to other 60 card formats, or what do you guys think?
I think at a large scale, I would say, like from the bird's eye view, I would say yes, it's balanced. Maybe it's a little bit less healthy. I think from a slightly closer in scale, I think that there are some sort of moderately serious balance issues that we can address later on. But it's not just like, tiny little tweaks sort of thing. But it's also not like Flash.
Yeah, it's not quite.
Because
there are definitely unhealthier Magic formats, like comparatively.
Yeah,
I would say.
Well, one of the things that I was as I was saying, like the how long can you play the format before experiencing burnout? I think CDH has had quite a bit of longevity in this respect, where we get like something like standard. I was gonna say modern, but I mean this isn't even necessarily true. Modern, like the modern format now is basically it rotates when the next Modern Horizons gets printed. Like it's kind of the card pool and card quality has gone to that point. Whereas something like historic or standard, they rotate it and can change with almost every set. And CDH, it's or EDH in general, you're playing with the entire card pool of Magic. So it's less in CDH. You're playing with the highest power level of those cards. So it's less. It's not often that you're going to get a new card that completely shakes up the meta and changes things. So I mean, the I don't even get into like what is the biggest, most impactful card that was printed. But like realistically, sometimes it's 1 to 2 years before the meta gets really like shaken up a lot. And so I think that's, and the fact that people are still the community is still growing and people are still eager to play because you're able to brew different decks and play different strategies. I think that indicates quite a bit of health form.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that every 2 years we get a shake up and like it's still like compelling to play in those 2 years. Like there's still like a very compelling reason.
Mm-hmm. So that's that. And let's get into a more in-depth breakdown of what makes a format balanced and what balance means. So I'll pass the talking stick along to someone else, so I'm not But,
What? Reed's not here.
Sure. I guess I can start. So, I mean, the most sort of simplistic definition is just when you show up to the table, like, do you have a fair chance at winning? And so that means it means a few different things. The most obvious of which is that there has to be at least a somewhat balanced set of top decks or top archetypes, and we've all agreed there has to be more than one of them. Um, so,
Yeah.
like, theoretically, a four-way Flash Hulk mirror was balanced and that everyone had a chance to win. But I think everyone understands that if there's truly no choice in what deck you bring or what strategy you're employing, that's probably not a balanced balanced format.
I think we kind of disagreed here a little bit, because I would definitely consider like the four-way Flash Hulk to not necessarily be balanced. Like I would like to see like major core components being different. Like in that case, in the case you described, like I don't know.
Sorry, I meant like it's a balanced game, other than
like everyone has a fair chance at winning, but as we've discussed, we think the minimum is like 2, right? You need at least 2 decks to be, to be considered, or 2 archetypes, whatever, to have it be considered a balanced form. Yeah. And so, speaking of that, we've got archetype balance, which is kind of what Morgan was getting.
And then I think the other sort of thing is looking at the balance in a single game, and what are the various factors that give one player or another a higher chance to win. And I think it's also important to recognize that, like, as Linda brought up with sort of the reductio of a coin flip, is that it's not necessarily desirable that like every game sort of everyone has the same opportunities to do the same sorts of things. Like, some elements of asymmetric gameplay are actually good, even if it's a little bit maybe less balanced. That's something where health and fun comes in. So we're not saying that every deck has to play out the exact same, and every deck and every pod should have the same chance of winning. But it's a list of it's a bunch of scales, and essentially you can't get too extreme on any one of them before you're considered unbalanced.
Yeah, and so I think it's a pretty good thing for balance. And I think what the more interesting and discussion in terms of like how to shape a format is, because I think ultimately balance is evaluating whether or not it's like whether or not a coin toss is fair. Is it truly 50-50? Like, is that fair? That's kind of what the at core balance is. But I think where people kind of get into more is like, should we ban this? Should we change up the format, shake it up? It really has to do more with health. And health, it's a lot harder to apply kind of just metrics and data to determine whether or not a format is health. I mean,
it's very subjective.
The best metric would not be something like win rates for decks. It'd probably be something like player participation. Are people participating in events for this format? Is like a good example is I think it's happened with Modern, and it's happened with Legacy as well, where decks have been banned, and this is something they've done more recently, where cards have been banned because basically there's an outcry and people are deeming these cards unfun, despite the fact that according to Wizards' own data, the decks do not have like a disproportionate advantage over other decks in the meta. Like they might be top tier and 53-54% win rate. I think it's like when it gets to 55, I think is the benchmark they use for problematic decks. But I think that's like they've been doing that a lot more recently, where if in Legacy before Ragavan was just banned, the Legacy challenge was having a tough time firing. So I think that's kind of indicator of format health, where it's like maybe even if the Ragavan decks aren't so dominant or whatever, that they're winning 70-60% of the time or something, people just do not want to participate in the format because they're not finding joy. And that's the kind of metric you'd have to use for health. So it's a lot harder to kind of get right.
Yeah, I guess I'd also say like a lot of the time an unbalanced format can sort of be healthy temporarily, but often sustained imbalance will impacts format health pretty negatively. And when it's the same thing day in and day out, people just stop showing up eventually, even with when the new hotness comes out, everyone's playing it and everyone's having fun and it's a cool deck and people like it, and then it's like, oh, okay, a few months in, oh, this is actually a big problem. Like I think that first GP where everyone played Eldrazi in Modern, it was like, wow, these decks are sick, and then it's like, oh, these are the only decks, and that's going to be a problem if this keeps going.
Yeah, and which is also, I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily say like these are the only best decks is necessarily an indication of that, like directly, because I mean, I think we've had that for a long time in CDH, like for certain periods of time, and that hasn't necessarily resulted in the same level of burnout that Eldrazi Winter did.
Yeah, I think one thing with CDH is, and this is something I've kind of said a lot, is that we're a lot closer to EDH players than 60 card players. People are more likely to play what they like than what is good. Like which is like the kind of idea of like EDH. It's like, I'm just going to play what I enjoy. But I think that's ultimately true of CDH players as well. I mean, people do like picking top tier decks, but we could list off the decks that we think are top tier, and or even ask players who like, what do you think is the best deck in the format? What are the best decks in the format? And then you'll look at what decks they own and play, and it's like, oh, those aren't those decks. So why are you playing these? Well, because I enjoy.
Well, I think also like CDH, one of the things that's like I think makes discourse about CDH like hard, even not like between people who disagree, is just that like so much of the ideas and concepts that could theoretically be ported from 60 card Magic like do not apply cleanly. And one of those is that like the variance in CDH is so high that you can do like not great but okay with like a deck that's very, very obviously substantially weaker than its competition. So like you don't have that same like you show up and you go like 0-4 in best of 3 matches for weeks on end because you're playing like a deck that's not really meta and not very good right now, right? Like sometimes you just have that crazy opener, or like the game gets sort of clogged up and you just kind of come out on top or whatever. Like those are things that just don't happen in 60 card formats with nearly the same frequency. So a deck underperforming is like a much more immediate problem for its pilots.
So in terms of health, we talked about an enjoyable balance. We also have here that the average game is decisive and doesn't go to time. And this is also, I mean, we've got some cards listed, under, we've got a future topic or point on unhealthy play patterns. And we've got some things from like 60 card decks, where one of the things, they're cards that are banned for going to time and causing things to go to time and making, tournament structures, super super chaotic because everything is going to time always, and yeah. So you don't want that in a format to be healthy. You want people to be able to. You want to feel like you're playing the game, and not playing the game around the game of the tournament, right? It's why people don't, the people, are not, super welcoming and enthusiastic about people who are called rules sharks or lawyers or I guess maybe not that's the right term. I guess like angle shooting or whatever, right? I'm trying to it's the people who care too much about like maybe the procedure and this sort of thing in a tournament setting. If someone is calling a judge every 15 seconds in your match because of like some technicality or something, it's like that tends to get annoying and grating. And if they're doing things like taking a deck that's or if the game is kind of enabled to take a deck that is just going to go to time and kind of abuse the structure of a tournament or something like that, that's not healthy. And that's just not an enjoyable way to play the game.
This one in particular, I feel like relates to CDH more than other Magic formats. Like it, especially when a game's about to go to time, like you're thinking about the broader tournament, and like that is not necessarily the greatest mindset to be in.
Yeah. I also think that like sort of in the same vein, games always going to time, or even if it's untimed, like taking forever is a problem. But also the opposite can definitely be a problem. Like you could theoretically have a balanced format of uninteractive combo decks, but that probably wouldn't be healthy, right? Like if every game is just like it's ending on turn 2 or turn 3, whoever combos first just kind of gets there. That's also a warning sign, maybe that things aren't healthy. Similar to how like if every game's taking 15 turns and nobody can do anything, that might also be a warning sign about the health of your format. So you want
I feel like
I was gonna say I've got a hilarious kind of comparison because it's we I remember testing like with Reed and you were like Cody for tier 1, and like those games were not enjoyable, and it's like we played the same amount of time that we were going to play for the night anyway, and we played more games, but it's like you're not getting to like enjoy it, and if most of your time is spent shuffling and setting up the game, and less of it is spent playing the game, that could definitely be an issue. But it's like the comparison I was going to use is if you have to go take a leak, you can, if you don't want to be there taking a leak for too long. You don't want to be there, you don't have to take a leak and then 5 minutes later you have to go back up and relieve yourself again. You want just the right amount of time to relieve your bladder, and CDH is really exactly the same as that.
It's just like peeing.
I actually don't understand this analogy.
That needs to stay in.
No, it's staying in.
It's staying in for sure.
If you had to, okay. I mean, just how long? It feels good to relieve your bladder, man. If you have to go pee, right?
It does, yeah.
But how long? If you're standing there for like 10 minutes, it stops becoming enjoyable.
That's why I bring my phone.
But like, okay, where this falls apart for me is that like if you just peed quickly and then didn't have to go pee again in 10 minutes, like would that not also be preferable? Like.
Yeah.
Okay, I think to get back on topic a little bit.
Right.
I think turns.
Listeners,
is like
listeners, let us know what you think. Okay,
let us know, please.
Who's right here? Okay,
just
definitely
make sure you word your
They're gonna
comments
vote
carefully.
for you because it's funny, but you're not right. Truth isn't
To
determined
get
by
back
consensus.
to the topic, I think turns is close, but I feel like I'd extend that a bit more, because if games ended on turn 3 consistently, but I also every player had the opportunity to play a quarter of their deck, that would still feel healthy to me.
Well, I think that's one of the things that people talk about with EDH versus CDH, right? Where they're like, game's ending on turn 4. It's like, Well, turn 4 in EDH is like you're still developing. That's you're casting your explosive vegetations on turn 4,
yeah.
or turn 3 if you did a rampant. It's like in CEDH, development is turn 1 and 2, and it's like things are happening 3 and 4, and like the game can be over by then. But you could have taken the same amount of game actions and played just as much Magic in that time period. But
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to focus
like that with coding.
I didn't mean to focus on turns. I more meant to focus on like the play patterns where every deck is just trying to uninteractively win as fast as possible, which in theory would lead to the fastest possible average game time. Is like I think that would be a very unhealthy pattern, even if there were a lot of different decks. Like not
Optimal
having any
CDH.
decks that are
Optimal CDH is just everyone sits down at a table, we shuffle up, we draw our opening hands, and then we all agree that 3 players concede, shuffle up, move to the next game, and then the next player wins.
Dude, yes. Thank you for finally saying it.
Yeah.
Dude, the year is 20XX. Everyone plays Cody Turbonas with TAS levels of.
I know you're being sarcastic, but I feel like that is sometimes how like QMTG games play out.
Oh, you're going first. Here's the win. Let's shuffle up and go again. Yeah. So that was the average game is decisive, and then we also have win chances not varying a ton in turn order, which this is something we were kind of talking about pre-show, which is you don't want to vary too much. Ideally, it'd be 50-50, but it's so hard to get this right in like a asymmetrical or yeah, not asymmetrical. What's the
Sure, I mean that's a word.
That's fine, yeah.
There's the I don't know. I was thinking of like strategy games like Fire Emblem, where it's like I guess it's like turn-based strategy game or what they would say. But yeah, anyway, like a turn-based game. It's so hard to get a perfect balance between the player going first and second. Just that initiative is so strong.
Yeah.
And so it's maybe you could tweak it a lot if you're like, okay, well, the player going first, okay, they're not going to draw a card, and the player going second, they draw a card, but then you also make like a treasure, and then or like and they make 2 treasures, and the other player makes a treasure, and they get a clue. It's like you could maybe kind of tweak it enough to where it's almost 50-50, but at that point you're like introducing so much other BS that it's just it kind of
there could potentially be a more elegant solution.
As long as the treasure isn't an artifact and isn't a spell and isn't like, I feel like that's
not
a lesson.
The coin.
Yeah, that's a lesson that Hearthstone had to teach the world.
Yeah.
Was like, if you're gonna give them an extra mana, it can't interact with other effects that interact with cards.
Dude, imagine getting a token. That'd be great, right?
Just get a lotus petal to your hand, dude. Free storm. Free storm, free artifact.
Free storm. Casting the spell doesn't count as casting. What?
It literally have to be like an emblem with an activated ability or something, and like a counter, or like you sacrifice.
No, it literally you make.
Can
the
you
blue
sacrifice
permanent,
emblems? Does anyone know? I guess
you can't
they're not
sacrifice
I
permanents,
don't
right?
think so. You have to restart.
It's like the monarch, dude. You can't sacrifice them. It's an emblem, right?
No, but like obviously there are no effects that let you sacrifice emblems, but like, what would happen if something said to sacrifice an emblem? Like, it just wouldn't work in the rules. Anyways, sorry, that's me being mean.
Emblems are like ghosts, dude. You can. I don't know where
your takes are on point today.
They're in the ethereal plane, man. Can't interact with them unless you have you throw like salt on the ground and you have a seance. It's the only way to interact.
Yeah.
Dude, but then I'd have to touch chalk. No, thank you.
You have to say monarch 3 times in a mirror. Candles.
Yeah, so games not varying a ton in turn order, hard to get perfectly right, but you don't. It is very much the spectrum of the ideal scenario would be 50-50, going first, going second, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, going third and fourth.
The worst
0%
case scenario
chance, get wrecked.
is going is 100 and 0, right? Person going first wins every time. It's like tic-tac-toe or all those other like solved games. They become a lot less interesting once you figure out the strategy for going first, and there's nothing you can do anymore, right? You want to have some agency over the outcome of the game. You want there to be some, some chance. So striking, you want it to be as close to 50-50 as possible, but not within at least within a reasonable distance of,
or even 25-25, 25-25, seeing as we play a four-player free-for-all format.
Yeah.
No, 50-50, 0-0.
I mean, one person in CDH has a 50% win rate, or close to it, right? Is it like, it's like 40% or some shit?
I think it's about 40%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I think it's sort of like 40, 25, 20, 15, if I remember correctly. I mean, they fluctuate from meta to meta, update to update, but like, it's definitely
That's
comfortably
so
above
crazy.
30% going first and around 15% going last.
That's
Like,
something I'd be. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
It was literally a joke for us at tier 1 about like our turn orders going up into the finals. It was I'm going third in game 1. I guess I'm gonna lose.
Well, I mean, I guess going back to talking about tier 1, like that was one of the things I was talking about with Morgan and Reed, who we all took the Cody decks, right? It's like, what was your seeding like, and I think seeding wise, it's like it kind of did reflect our records to some extent, right?
Yeah, Cody especially, like just having such an advantage early game.
Yeah, and that's not exactly ideal. Although, I guess one thing I was gonna say was, I would be interested in. I was gonna say lobbying, but I mean that's being aggressive. I'd be interested in seeing changes to the commander, or because I guess it's not exactly in the commander rules, is it? Right? It's baked into like the Magic. Is it in the comprehensive rules on 4-player multiplayer or something like that?
Yeah,
multiplayer. Yeah. I'd be interested in seeing changes to that to try and balance EDH a bit more. Like, people have suggested, the first player doesn't draw a card, second player doesn't draw a card, but they get it just something, right? Like, I'd be or like, just even if it is like a treasure card, blah blah blah, whatever, like something like that to kind of make it more equal, I think would be interesting.
That might be a little tricky, just because I doubt that the rules are formatted around 4-player as being multiplayer rather than multiplayer being more than 2 players. In which case, like, you'd have to have some sort of balance equation.
I mean, no, you could do something relatively simple, like just at the start of the game, like each player scries N, where N is the number of players ahead of them in turn order, would probably be like the simplest. Or X or whatever.
Yeah,
like
that doesn't seem too bad.
But yeah, obviously, like if you're like, oh, in 4-player the person going second gets a treasure, but like in 3-player they don't. yeah, just miss me with that.
You get 1/2 a mana.
2/3 profitability.
If anyone hasn't seen it, go watch the Gregory Hatch deck tech on his Artificer's Intuition.
Did it come up last episode? Are we actually recommending it 2 episodes in a row? It's in recent memory for sure.
Dude, Goldfish Brain, man, I don't know. Go watch it. Go watch every one of Gregory Hatch's videos.
Speaking of goldfishing.
So that was So health we've talked about. An enjoyable balance. Average game is decisive, doesn't go to time, and win chances not varying too much in turn order. And here's kind of where we differ in health from balance, and that gets to kind of archetypes, where how we said the minimum case for a balanced format was 2 decks of distinct archetypes being roughly equal win rates, right? So like there's a tier 1, and it's like a tiers. People talk about tier 0 formats, right? At tier 0 formats, there's only ever one deck in a tier 0, right? It's a cut above everything else in the format. But if you have a tier 1 that's made up of 2 decks, that's the kind of minimum case to meet balance. And then sometimes there's formats that are like, your tier 1 is 3 decks, where it's like a rock paper scissors format. Where one deck preys on the other, and that preys on the next. A preys on B, B preys on C, C preys on A, whatever. That another balanced format, but that's not necessarily optimal and healthy. I think what makes I guess I'm not going to say what do you guys think is an appropriate amount of archetypes that are roughly of the same tier to have for a format to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would feel like it would probably transcend formats a little bit, like archetypes kind of that have crept up in other formats, like kind of inherent playstyles in the rules.
I guess like I would say I think you need at least a deck that, like, there should be a deck that is just trying to end the game as fast as possible, and like that can be fast combo, that can be aggro, but like I think that's an important one. There needs to be one that is just trying to neutralize every threat that its opponents put out, which is typically rendered as control. And then I don't know, you want something sort of in the middle or in between.
The resilient deck that can't easily be controlled, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess I would say you want at least 3. And then like sort of slow, medium, fast in terms of speed. And then possibly a couple like that. You probably want at least a couple more on top of that. But it kind of also varies format to format. Like I think that based on the way the card pool in a format looks and certain strategies being sort of inherently unviable. Like, for example, aggro is inherently unviable in CEDH. Just
stacks is inherently unviable in modern.
Yeah. So like, that might change. There might be something that's like less practical. So I guess I would say like you want a fast combo deck. You want a you want a control deck. You want something more in the middle, and then you probably want at least one other thing for spice. Like maybe that's a tempo-y deck. Maybe that's like something really grindy that isn't necessarily like control, like something more like Jund in modern, or maybe it's a stacks deck. But yeah, so I guess that's my my set of four that you want.
Yeah, there's kind of an interesting idea there, like 4 archetypes in a 4-player format. Like,
and when you
maybe there needs to be enough archetypes that if there was an imbalance in archetypes in a pod, that shouldn't be a problem. Like if there's 3 control decks versus 1 somewhere in the middle deck, that shouldn't necessarily be a problem.
Yeah, I think for me, what makes a format healthy, it kind of has to do with that there's like the player profiles. There's like Timmy, Spike, Johnny, whatever. It's like if you have that kind of level of player profile, but then also the player profile of like control players, aggro players, or combo players, whatever, right? You incorporate all of those. If not just the majority, but if almost every one of them of those profiles can find some deck that they enjoy at least, like 70, they have maybe not maximum enjoyment. It's like, I wish blue-white control was, or mono-blue control was viable in modern right now. It's a tier 1 deck. It's like, that'd be 100% enjoyment for a particular player, but if you can get at least like 70% enjoyment out of a deck, maybe not blue-white or mono-blue control, but maybe blue-white. Or maybe I can play like
there's a control deck that uses blue and counter spells. Like,
exactly. You're able to find something that you enjoy to a reasonable degree. I think that is kind of what makes a format healthy. And it's, if you we think to all these like tier 0 formats, and it's like, well, if you're having to play Eldrazi, well, I mean, Eldrazi is not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone wants to play Eldrazi, and so you're playing the deck you want to play, and then you're just getting rolled by Eldrazi, and you just don't stand a chance. It's not really that's not really healthy. And even when there's a select few decks at the top, if you're kind of being excluded, then that's not great. And another thing too is it's not just about what's at the tier 1, because it also depends on how the tiers are kind of like stratified, where it's, if your tier 1 is leagues, if you kind of tier decks in terms of like, well, we've filled out tier 1, and then everything that's like worse than that, and that's the next tier, that's tier 2. Like, you could be in a format where there's 2 decks that are like tier 1, and then realistically tiers 2 and 3 are completely empty, and then there's everything else is like tier 4 in comparison, right? Like, you could imagine a system where things are like that. So if you just have a format where, like, if that's the case, where it's like a 5% win difference between each of those tiers or something, but if you just have tiers that are kind of like much closer together, where someone can play something that's in like the tier 3, but it's maybe it's only like 5% worse than the tier 1 meta, like, that's also acceptable, right? People are at least able to play something they enjoy, because the way all these formats work is that the tiers are pyramids, right? You get more and more decks the lower you go down in tiers. So if you can reduce the amount of difference between your tier 1 and 2 and 3, it's like having a large tier 1 or a large tier 2 or something. So that's also a way to go about it, ensuring that people are able to have a moderate amount of success with whatever they.
Yeah, for sure. I think people do tend to overfixate on just like what's at the very top, but having a more fleshed out
from in CDH as well.
Yeah, having a more fleshed out set of decks sort of working down from there, I think, is also a very important aspect that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, it's like that's the we could probably do an entire episode on our own just about, like, CDH viable versus high power versus whatever. And it's like, I think people tend to, when people think CDH, right, I mean, and the database helps kind of show this with a ton of different decks, but I mean, the database, I mean, I don't begrudge them, this is a difficult task of having to kind of draw the line somewhere, right? And inevitably you're going to have many decks that are CDH viable, or people that are playing these in CDH pods, they're just not going to make it, or their decks are being excluded from the database. It's like, that's it's a hard task, but even still, even the decks that do make it on, you see a massive diversity, right? There's so many decks in CDH that people can take, because the threshold for the moderate amount of success, I think in 2 episodes ago, I talked about like 15% as the rough kind of thing that I use as a rule. It's like, if a deck can get 15%, win 15% of the time in a pot of other kind of established CDH decks, I'd consider that CDH viable. So, like, the tiers of CDH viability, I think it's quite large, which helps contribute to the format. Yeah. So next up, we have some unhealthy play patterns. So things that make, I mean, we've discussed what makes a format healthy. It could be instructive to also discuss what specifically makes it unhealthy.
Flash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I interpreted this category as like kind of consequences of the format. I know we kind of have a combination of that and also specific cards. But I'll just start it off with accidental kingmaking. So this is like, we all know what kingmaking is, which is looking out for your opponent's win rather than yours. Where accidental kingmaking is, you are looking out for your win, but you are forced into kind of prioritizing just such a small chance that the person who plays next almost certainly wins. I feel like we've all experienced this one in CDH, which is why I'm bringing it up. Um, and
I mean, yeah, it
it's
was
hard to
definitely
kind of pinpoint.
that was definitely an issue that was exacerbated with Flash, where like there were a bunch of cards that like you actually just couldn't play, like that, like powerful cards that you might want to play that Flash just like completely invalidated. Like primarily Rule of Law was probably the biggest one.
Even worse than
Yeah,
that though was
that's
like
true.
it was just so easy to make a mistake. It's like, oh, you didn't hold up your interaction on the right on turn soon enough, and you decide to develop. You've ruined the game for everyone else, and you've king make. It's like, I mean that might be a bit hyperbolic, but that's the kind of thing where it was very a format where it's very easy to screw up, and everything's like balanced on the head of a needle is not is not ideal. Far from ideal actually.
That's kind of, you know what, that's kind of like a slightly different angle, this, because I feel like, and for another example, like, um if you know that the person next in the turnover is gonna win, and you know that everyone's waiting with their counter spells to stop that person, but if you don't go off, you're almost certainly thinking you're going to lose. Like, you kind of have to go off. You have to try, even though there's like such a minuscule chance. And I think there's like that's slightly different.
No, I agree that, but
Yeah.
I think that's not quite the point that I'm making. It's more like you need to be hyper aware of what's going on in the game and how things are taking. It's like Cody, right? It's like if you sit down and see Cody, and let's say Cody's going like first or second, um, and you're like, okay, blah blah blah, gets around to me, turn two, um, I'm gonna, oh, okay, I'll do these plays. It's sometimes in Cody, it's already too late. Like you've already messed up because you were supposed to have mulliganed differently already, right? It's like if those kind of decisions um are extremely like if those are if the weight on those kind of decisions is extreme, then I think that's kind of what contributes to some
Yeah.
unhealthiness kind of along the lines of what I'm talking about. Not necessarily like evaluating that this is your window and you have to go for it even if it's going to make the next player win. Like you just need to maximize your own win percent. Not quite that. More like I'm trying to play the game to maximize my win percentage, but you know I screwed up and now the entire game is like thrown.
yeah,
It's like some decks need to be piloted perfectly and make like control decks, right? It's like if you let the wrong spell resolve, then your entire game is over. Whereas it's like if something like maybe a more grindy deck, like a Jund or something in modern, or Jund is a bad example with the current whatever. But it's like if you pointed your removal at the wrong thing, you sequenced a bit incorrectly. It's like you're not going to get punished super severely, and you can kind of recover from that. But I think in
Yeah.
metagames where you're punished severely, it's just
There's definitely the flip side, which is, you know, mistakes are just so insignificant that, the best players aren't the ones who are winning consistently, and that's
yeah.
definitely also unhealthy. Um, and I feel like, honestly, CDH doesn't lean too heavily to the mistakes or game breaking. Like, there are definitely some big ones, like Rule of Law specifically in that example you mentioned, but generally speaking, I feel like I've been pretty satisfied.
I think 4-player free for all definitely contributes to having a buffer for allowing people to make mistakes. Um, well, what kind of can
Yeah.
frustrate people when they're playing CDH, and this is something that I think, you know, people talk about, oh, you kind of ruined the game, or it's like, and this is a whole nother can of worms where you can get into someone playing like a mid power deck in a CDH pod. It's like have they ruined the game, or is someone making a mistake ruining the game for you? Or should you have maybe played around them, potentially making a mistake. Like if you're doing everything, it's like if you're just assuming everyone's going to play in some perceived optimal manner, and then and they don't necessarily conform to that, how much of a right do you have to be mad at them for ruining the game? And we've all experienced this, and to some extent, there's like, man, you're just blindly countering this, or you're blindly using your interaction, please don't do that. But maybe the opposite end is, oh, you countered my threatening spell, but you should have I'd kind of done the calculation that this spell that the player had tutored for last turn was going to be 10 times more threatening, or something. Like, it's sometimes you can't just be mad at every for that sort of situation. It's definitely tough.
Unhealthy games are ones where everything's personal.
Yeah. Yeah. CDH and EH is the best played when everyone's just a little bit buzzed, just a little bit. everyone's a bit more social. The social lubricant has been applied.
What kind of lessons are you teaching our audience?
Get drunk, play CDH games, kids. Yeah, go into
no,
wait, hold on.
Okay, don't say that.
Yeah.
And by kids, we of course mean adults of legal drinking age wherever they happen to live.
When you play Magic, don't break any laws, which means you can't make any proxies. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. So yeah, that was accidental king making, and I feel like I'd started to scratch the surface of a more in-depth issue, and then maybe we can do another podcast or discussion on that, but we can kind of curtail that here. So next up, we have kind of a list of cards that have been banned, not in CDH, but in 60 card formats, to kind of illustrate unhealthy play patterns that they created, and then we can discuss how they those kind of things could exist in CDH. So first thing on this list we have is Sensei's Divining Top, which I'm gonna say legacy. I mean, it's obviously like in the pool of modern cards, but was never really like been banned for a long ass time.
Forever.
Yeah, like Top being banned in legacy had a lot to do with it taking a lot of game time, and a lot of time just in game was spent on doing Top things, right? And it's very easy it's like if you're very proficient with Top and you're like an expert at playing miracles, then you can actually play at a reasonable pace. But every time you're having an option to take an action, and the decision can be very impactful, and getting the order right on the cards for Top matters a lot. Remembering what they are, it's like all this stuff matters a lot, and it just adds a ton of time to the game. I mean, I think Top was also extremely strong, and the games that Top miracles wasn't like so dominant above everything else, that's why it was banned. Like, it was strong, it had very interesting matchups, but it really had to do with just making the game drawn out and miserable, it just in tournaments overall, and then especially for people who aren't necessarily experts. And I think a good corollary to this in CDH or EDH more generally is Paradoxing. And Morgan, you just added that to the list, so I'll let you discuss.
Well, yeah, I mean, like that was banned, not necessarily in CEDH, where typically, I mean, there were definitely long Paradox Engine turns, particularly in decks that didn't sort of take advantage of it in the most efficient ways, like things like Joyra. But like, it was just a huge problem in casual EDH where people would just sort of, all their spells are free, but like their deck is not set up to. It's like it was basically functioning like an Omniscience, but like with a bunch of extra obnoxious steps, which meant that
it's like if every time you wanted to cast a spell with Omniscience, you had to like roll a dice and like stand up and spin around and
yeah, exactly,
and land a bottle flip,
yeah, exactly, like and then you're like tracking floating mana is like actually exhausting. It's like one of the
counting backwards from 100 by 7.
Yeah, exactly.
These all sound like features to the card for me, man. I love that stuff.
Sure, but like if that's not the kind of game you signed up for necessarily, then that's a pretty unhealthy pattern of just watching someone take like a 15-minute turn and like they're not even winning, right? Like it's just that like the mechanics of this card are such that you can take a truly insane number of actions,
The
but
worst too
not
is
actually
because
win.
in EDH often, like, I mean, this is something we do in our play group. I don't know about other people, but like, you know, if someone is doing a storm turn, we'll offer to help the person. Like, here, I'll track your storm. I'll track
Your floating
mana,
mana,
blah, blah, blah.
your whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so like to so that they can just focus on decision making. And it's like with Paradox Engine that happens sometimes, especially if the player was like, okay, we think he's gonna win. But if it's like, damn, I need him to mess up like once, so you're like, I can't offer to help him, right? Because I've got to interact to just so it's like that. Then it just makes it even worse. It's
double standard.
it's a disaster. So yeah, top Paradox Engine. I think very very actually good comparisons, and it's part of the reason why it's like I would love Paradox Engine to be back so that we could get back the nice meta diversity that we had. But at the same time, I'm the reason is very valid in my eyes, and that's something that just can't be remedied. So it's probably just a permanent feature of the ban list. Yeah. Next up we have KCI. So this was an interesting one, I think. How many? I don't know if there's many other cards on 60 card ban lists or even like EDH ban lists that kind of are reflective of parts
People
of the
not
reason
knowing
why KCI
how the
was
rules work.
Yeah, of like it just being a very like, so it's strong, had a good win rate, but it was just very like so not necessarily intuitive with like rules. Is like very it'd be like if banning Chains of Mephistopheles or something in CEDH or EDH because of just like I don't know how Chains works, like the classic meme. And it's like Chains isn't even that like complicated, but it's like if Chains plus replacement effect of like Dredge and then also like Sylvan Library and like all of this stuff is coming up, or like layered replacement effects or layering. If this sort of thing was actively being taken advantage of, then and it's strong and it's like something that people have to deal with, then I could see kind of a case for banning. Like,
I'm pretty sure
the rules interactions come up every now and then, but
I'm pretty sure in the ban announcement they described the required rules knowledge of KCI as arcane. Or like maybe it wasn't the ban announcement, it was in like some discussion or article on the card from Wizards that was like that was their descriptive word of choice.
I think what it kind of has to, and what this is, and what makes it unhealthy, is it adds an unnecessary barrier to entry for, I mean, and barrier to entry to kind of just participate. I mean, the thing is, it's not even just barrier to entry for new players, which I think is definitely something that should be considered and should matter. But it's like already enfranchised players. It's like I have to go read a shit ton of stuff from in the comprehensive rules, or even MTR, like specifically to figure out how this works and like understand this well. It's like now you're increasing this kind of burden of knowledge beyond just like the basic Magic rules, right? And it's not something, because judges are there to kind of resolve things that could come up that are kind of non-intuitive, and so a lot of the burden is taken off of the individual player, right? To know all of the rules in and out, so for these cases niche situation happens. But if if the deck is like at the top of the meta, and this is coming up in every single tournament or game, it's just grating. It's grating and cumbersome to have to kind of understand all of these things to that level. Like, I mean, I've looked at layers and stuff before, but it's like, I mean, I can't be fucked to learn totally how layers work. Like,
and like there are requirements of understanding with something like KCI. There are requirements of understanding that like a judge isn't allowed to give you, right? Like a judge can't answer like, when should I cast this Nature's Claim to disrupt this combo? Like, that's not a question a judge is allowed to answer. So like they can confirm that whatever the hell the person is doing, where they just sort of wave their hands, they have like a chromatic star and they're like sort of just waving it around a bunch, and it's like, yeah, that's all legal, but like that doesn't mean you know how to use your cards to stop it, unless you like really understand what's going on. Like it's happened to me in like EDH games with like decently, enfranchised players where it's like,
someone forgets how trample works totally reasonably,
I don't know how reasonable that is, but like, yeah, like just people have like, forgotten like how a certain interaction works. I mean, like, I guess the most obvious one is Krark and Sakashima, like people interacting with that at the wrong time or like trying to, do certain things, like the number of people who I've seen like counter a spell and then you go like cool Krark trigger is like, and they're like, wait, what? I countered it. It's like, no, you still get the copy. Like that's, like that's not particularly complex, but it's not intuitive, and like it's pretty punishing if you don't know that.
Is there anything to the niche like levels of rulesiness about like KCI? Because for EDH or CDH, because I was trying to think. I remember because years and years ago, do you remember the post I did on the subreddit about like, and this is something that's just not common, and it was like very specifically for a deck at that time, which was like news combos using Apprentice Necromancer and like Wall of Roots ability on like Necrotic Ooze, like where there was a very kind of niche thing you could take advantage of with timing, of paying for an ability by putting a -0 and -1 counter, and still being able to sacrifice it because state-based actions aren't checked before the ability has finished resolving to sacrifice it. So like the creature briefly exists as a 1/0, and it still you're still able to sack it.
But
sorry,
it's a 2/0. It's a Necrotic Ooze.
Wow, did you even learn anything from that post?
my own post, yeah. But I don't think like that was the closest thing I could think of. Is there anything else that like?
I mean, only in my my Kestia brew, where the whole Volrath's Shapeshifter Wall of Roots interact. Basically, Wall of Roots is just a weird card.
I guess Volrath Shapeshifter briefly during Hulk meta, had some kind of does some weird things that were kind of.
I guess, yeah. Funnily enough, people like one of the ones that like people were looking at Volrath's Shapeshifter, and like a lot of people didn't realize that if you cast Flash and you put in Hulk, the Flash goes to the graveyard on top of the Hulk, and like you don't have a choice about that, and that's how it happens.
I guess maybe the closest non-obvious interaction that has to come up is probably, I mean, like chains and dredge. That's probably the hardest one that you might regularly come up against.
Yeah.
Like layering replacement effects.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like actual. I don't think anyone's playing Volrath Shapeshifter anymore.
Please don't ban chains of stuff, please. Yeah. And then so that was KCI. Then we have, I guess this one we could have kind of mentioned with top, and this is Second Sunrise, where I guess.
That was less Second Sunrise the card and more the deck it enabled. Like top as a card is just very slow, whereas like Second Sunrise isn't necessarily. It's just that the strategy that it was propping up was very slow. But yeah, it's definitely like that was purely just rounds were taking too long.
I mean, this occasionally happens in CDH where you kind of arrive at the Second Sunrise sort of situation. Maybe not quite to that extent, but I think you definitely see this with Ad Nauseam, especially with the earlier the Ad Nauseam, where you're say you're main phasing it, you're maybe tapping out or going extremely low on resources, drawing cards and having to decide when to stop, and constantly looking at your hand to be like, can I win here? Do I have to keep going? And then once you have the 30 cards in your hand in front of you, it's like, how do I piece this together and sequence everything correctly so I'm winning the game? It's like sometimes you'd see that happen with Cody, And a lot of times we kind of mitigate that in our own play group by being like, you're nosing for 30, let's see the pile, and then basically everyone kind of looks at the pile and it's like, can we piece out the win ourselves? And then if we do, it's like, we'll concede.
Or there's like one or two soft hate pieces, can also like really throw a wrench in the works. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just play this dockside. Oh, wait, there's like a torpor. Okay, well, I guess do I have the mana to get that out of play to play the dockside, or I just abandon playing the dockside? Stuff like that.
One thing Second Sunrise does too that's kind of unique is it the game is always decisive, but it always goes to time. and that kind of differentiates it a bit from Top, where Top definitely goes to time, and that is actually a problem.
The game is not necessarily decisive, for sure. Yeah. I guess so just like on some other sort of types of unhealthy play patterns, I think I jokingly just said Flash at the start, but Flash, there are some more broader patterns to its play patterns that other cards could theoretically cause or exacerbate. One of the things, when we were talking about accidental king making, I think something that sort of goes hand in hand with that is skill disparities on interacting with a certain part of the game. So Flash is obviously the poster child for this, where it's really not that hard to just get Flash and Hulk and then cast Flash and then do your pile. But it was extremely hard to play correctly around that. And I think to a lesser extent, but still a meaningful one, we saw that with Cody, where it's really not that hard to just go off with Cody, but you have to know what you're doing and be pretty deliberate, and have a decent understanding in order to stop it. And that's a pattern that's often talked about in other games is if something is much easier to do than it is to counter, that's generally considered an unhealthy play pattern.
Yeah. The I guess an interesting, you're talking about Cody, and then that brings up the kind of discussions that we had regarding the version of Cody that I ended up taking to tier 1 con, the Untappers build, and when the optimal time to interact with that deck is. There was a while where there was a back and forth on oh, this is actually the correct time to interact, and no, this is the correct time. And it's just that's just not. If even the people who are putting together the deck can't necessarily figure out when the optimal time to interact with is, that's not. It doesn't bode well. So our last kind of topic in terms of unhealthy play patterns is consistent low mulligans.
Yeah, this is when 90% of the cards in your deck don't matter, and you just need to get down to the one or two things that, the one thing that really kind of makes your deck win. And on one hand, you have a cohesive deck, and that can be balanced if it's consistent enough. But on the other hand, you're kind of playing way less of the game, and I think that reflects on your opponents a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of this in 60 card, it's never been a real meta deck, but Treasure Hunt. It's just the meme Treasure Hunt deck where you run your 2 copies of Treasure Hunt or whatever, and then it's all the rest is lands and a Thoracle or something.
Yeah, I to a certain extent, I guess Belcher kind of does this.
Yeah. So that's it for unhealthy play patterns, and then our last kind of subcategory of our main topic is case studies. And we did our best to avoid this episode being the ban list 2.0 episode, where we discuss all the cards that we think are healthy for the format and unhealthy and decide what we want to get banned. But I think it's still going to be really instructive to talk about some of the cards that are in the in the sphere of discussion, I mean, we just had a ban announcement recently where nothing happened, but leading up to that, people were clamoring for Oracle and Dockside and other stuff, other things that maybe not of that tier. Yeah, so I think it's worth talking about these and kind of giving our take on whether they're healthy or not, and how do you kind of judge them. So our list of case studies that we're going to go through first is Thassa's Oracle, Dockside, Ad Nauseam, and then Hermit Druid. Hermit Druid, one of these things is not like the other, but
what do you mean? The Ad Nauseam, right? Because it doesn't cost 2 mana.
Sure,
it's not a 2-mana creature, 0 out of 10.
So yeah, let's talk about Thassa's Oracle.
Do we have to? Yeah, so I think Thoracle, I think, is a good example of a card that, obviously in concert with Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, forms a win condition, and to an extent a strategy, though that's a little bit more debatable, that it's very, very difficult to justify any other strategy over it. So, like, Oracle is the best combo in the format, and no one really disputes that, which I think is at least on the road to unhealthiness. And I don't necessarily, I think if we look at the combos that are next in line, I think a lot of them are like much more closely balanced with each other, and they have upsides and downsides that sort of trade off in a little bit more of what seems like a balanced way. Like breach combos are probably, they're easier to assemble, but like maybe Jace Consult, is a little bit more hate resilient, and some things are more or less susceptible to removal or easier or harder to counter. So I think that's Oracle right now in the meta is a pretty good example of something that is unhealthy, I would say.
Yep, I 100% agree. I think it's like very clearly an outlier in that regard too. Like I don't think there's a lot that's like close to its level in healthiness.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not Flash, and I don't want to, because this is one thing that I kind of
definitely not Flash. Yeah,
people are kind of, you're starting to see some people like lobbying a bit to the rules committee or the RC or CAG members, like, oh, I want the Oracle ban, I want Dockside ban. It's like we got a great deal with Flash, which was, it happened, and part of that, we had to say, we as a community, we kind of made a deal with the RC that this wasn't going to become a regular thing, that Flash was egregious and above everything else, and that with that gone, we can live with the rest. And I genuinely think that while Thoracle, I agree with you guys, Thoracle is kind of a clear cut above every other win condition. It's still, if Flash was tier 0, Thoracle's tier 1. It's still like a full tier below what Flash was doing. So it's something that I'm willing to kind of live with in our format. And to talk about the Thoracle being healthy or unhealthy, I think I agree that it itself as a combo and card is kind of inherently unhealthy because of the discrepancy between its power level and the power level of other combos in the format. But I think in CDH, you're going to have a bit of a harder time sussing that out in terms, like, even though it is unhealthy and it's the most popular combo, it doesn't necessarily make the overall metagame as unhealthy as it is compared to like other. And I think this is because it is so transplantable between decks, that it's any deck that's running blue and black can run Thoracle Console. And there's a lot of blue and black decks in CEDH, and there's different things that the commanders are doing. So there's different synergies to build around. So it's pretty easy to, not, every game is going to end with Thoracle Consult. or like Nas into Thoracle Consult, whatever. But the gameplay in between, there is still room for a little spice and variety.
Yeah, that certainly helps its case a lot. I think Flash didn't have that quite as much as just Oracle Console does. I guess because you would also have to play green, but
well, and also Flash just exerted kind of a crazy, like, Thoracle Consult is hands down the best win condition, but you don't. Everyone else doesn't have to augment their deck and their play style to combat it. Not everyone is in fear of being killed at instant speed for wanting a blue.
Yeah, and certainly like decks with Oracle, like it causes some problems mostly in like a bunch of the things that feel like they should be good hate against certain decks like aren't. I think most obviously the Collector Roof and Nullrod type effects when you play them against a Turbo Nas deck and they're like, well, I'm just gonna like tutor for Oracle and then like this combo only costs 3 mana, I could just pay that with lands.
It's also annoying that Deafening Silence doesn't stop it.
Yeah,
like
like stuff like that. But it's not like with Flash where the thought that you might just get randomly flashed like at any time requires like this enormous commitment throughout the game to like be ready for it. Like every once in a while, a deck will just like randomly consult, Oracle consult you on like turn 3 or whatever, and that's kind of a frustrating thing when it happens, but it's not like, oh, that deck has Oracle consult in it, so I'm gonna have to be on watch the entire game.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty much all in agreement. Thoracle Consult kind of inherently unhealthy, but the unhealthiness that it exerts in our format is not, panic levels like we've had in the past. And I think it's something where, I mentioned earlier in the show about how long can you play a format before, you're experiencing burnout. And it's like, I think it's just the same way with it's like Flash was so bad that like the burnout was much more extreme, and like even the players who were playing it were like, I might get burnt out soon. It's like I think Thoracle Consult, well, I could see eventually getting just absolutely tired of Thoracle Consult or Nas or whatever. It's just much slower, for me at least. And I would say probably for the rest of the format as well. Or at least that's my perception.
For sure.
Okay, so next up is Dockside Extortionists. Another one of the cards that was being clamored, people were clamoring to get banned. What do you guys think about Dockside Extortionists? Healthy, unhealthy?
Yeah. I think a pretty classic case of unhealthy, because it kind of goes against a particularly fair strategy, which is to put things on the board that help slow the game and be fair. But then Dockside just capitalizes on that a little bit, and in maybe a bit too much of a mana efficient way. But also for its rate, like it just makes a lot more mana, and that's just the nature of the format. Like it's just one of the best rituals, in addition to also just kind of interacting with fair decks in an unfair way.
Yeah, it provides decks like a great out to like Blood Moon and Back to Basics, which used to be a lot more backbreaking. Now it's like, wow, I've got a thing that's going to fix me for every single color I could possibly need, and I can cast it off the Blood Moon lands.
Yeah.
And then the thing with Dockside and being unhealthy is like I'm going to use. I told you guys this thing that I heard from a Legacy podcast before, and I just kind of want to reiterate it again here for our listeners, because I think it was very interesting to think about, which is in Legacy. I was listening to some a Legacy podcast, and they were talking about how back when True Name Nemesis was first printed into Commander set, people were freaking out in Legacy. They were like, "What the heck is this? Why are they printing this card for Legacy? It's so busted! Like, what the heck?" And then someone had pointed out that like, imagine for a second that True Name Nemesis was swapped with Wasteland. like Wasteland is something that Legacy has been putting up with for years, and it's part of the format, part of the identity of the format. But if you know, Wasteland had been printed in the commander set instead of True Name Nemesis, and True Name Nemesis has been the card that's been in the format for forever, like you guys would be just as complaining about it just as much. And it's arguably even just worse than True Name Nemesis in terms of like the impact that it has on the format and how busted it is. But because you've dealt with it for so long, you just think of it as part of the identity of the format. And I think that's something that we kind of need to consider for CDH, which is Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, these cards that enable insanely busted starts where it's like, if most decks are averaging turn, 3 wins, that, on occasion you're now going to be, a turn faster from your Mana Crypt or Soul Ring opener, or you're going to be doing something a turn or two faster than you would have previously that's going to set you up to win, like hands down in the long run. Like, Crypt plus Remora means that you can develop and pay for Remora for a long time, or, Crypt into Rhystic Study, that sort of thing. So I think Dockside, we should be thinking about Dockside along the lines of Soul Ring and Mana Crypt, where those kind of swingy things in games are already happening, right? Like they're already happening where games are decided by someone opening Mana Crypt or Soul Ring and Rhystic Study. And, same thing with Dockside, turn 2-3 Dockside into making a bunch of mana. It's very swingy, but that's something that, we've kind of come to accept with other cards in the format.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think another thing, sort of, when we talk about Dockside, and I think this is something that also came up a lot in discussions around Paradox Engine, is that it does actually help. It helps like strategies that otherwise struggle get a bit of a leg up. Like it also helps most obviously Turbo Nas, but like there are lots of like decks in maybe like Teamer or Jeskai that like Dockside is really helpful for, and like especially as you go even further down in colors like Mono Red and things like that. I'm not necessarily saying that it's like just it's great, it's just increasing diversity, but unlike something like Thoracle, which is like, okay, Thoracle is good in like blue-black decks that are like typically playing Nas. These decks don't need help, and I think that Dockside does provide help to decks that need it, or archetypes that need it more, as sort of a point in its favor.
A big problem though is it does impact a 4-color deck just as much as it impacts a mono-color deck, a mono-red deck.
Yeah. So for me, I think Dockside, I guess to kind of put a ball on this, I think Dockside, I would agree, is unhealthy, but I'll say, we just to reflect, remember to consider the fact that we're okay with a bunch of unhealthy cards in the format. There's so many cards in the format that provide such an advantage if you open them, and it's so swingy, and like things are almost kind of mitigated by the fact that there's 4 players and each player has the opportunity to open super busted, and that there's a kind of tension and things balance out because of it. If we're fine with those kinds of cards existing already because they've existed for a long time, then I think maybe consider applying that to Dockside, because I don't think it's so much more egregious than the likes of.
It's kind of funny on the like monocolor versus many-color point too. Like if you think about Mana Crypt in that same situation, it's similar, but actually I think Dockside benefits the higher color deck even more because it does provide access to all colors, like which is kind of meant to be a downside.
What they need to do is they just need to print a green Dockside that makes Llanowar elves for each creature in play.
And that would totally be, like compatible with their design language of green does everything, right?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Perfect.
I'm just thinking about that card. It's like, Dockside's effect in getting the immediate payoff and like color fixing is like wow, that's so strong. But I'm just thinking like, for 1 in a green, if there was an ETB and it makes a number of Llanowar elves equal to the number of creatures your opponents have in play, like,
oh,
God damn, that's really strong.
Yeah.
um, okay. So next up we have ad nauseum. So what makes ad nauseum? What's unique about the discussion surrounding ad nauseum as compared to Oracle and Dockside? Because I mean, it's like these cards, they're kind of offending something unique in their own right, but also they're kind of like, the Harry Potter scene where it's like, why is it when something goes wrong, it's always you three? I
Yeah.
definitely feel like there's a bit of that with Dockside, Nas, and Thoracle.
Yeah. Should be Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, and
So
Steady.
I mean, I think Nas is a card that's like, it's sort of weirdly fluctuated in how healthy or unhealthy it was. Like there was a time when like if you asked, if you took a survey and was like what card should be banned, like the clear most common response would have been ad nauseum. Like this would have been in maybe 2016. And then obviously like Flash Hulk sort of came up. And like even then the decks that were best at countering Flash Hulk weren't necessarily like Nas decks, or if they played Nas, they were Nas focused. But it's just gotten, I mean, Dockside helped a lot, some other sort of ritually things. And more cards that function like ad nauseum, just like more turbo payoffs have made it so that it's easier to play a deck that's just absolutely rammed full of fast mana. And so, the shift to like 0 mana main phase Nauses being consistent has like kind of made it, I think, a little bit less healthy. And also, I think we've seen the deck building consideration for Nas sort of slowly decrease over time, where like it was hard to put in a few chunky spells in your ad Nas deck for a while, and like now it's not. Like, there are decks that play like Razaketh. I mean, like, yes, Lyndon, we know Gitrog plays Titans, but like
Wow.
but like, good decks that play like Razaketh and ad nauseum.
Nice recovery there.
And like just sort of the requirements around it have decreased over time, and it's become, I would say, it's on the upswing of how unhealthy it is.
Well, and I think part of the reason why it's getting easier to put in chunky cards is because of cards like Dockside and Thoracle, where your win condition is extremely efficient, and you've got extremely efficient mana producers that also fix your colors. It's like, before it's like, okay, I've got to go Mana Crypt into Soul Ring into Mana Vault into Grim Monolith, and I've got all this colorless mana, and I've got to like filter it in using like Felwar Stone, and I guess this is before Arcane Signet or some talismans and stuff. And then I've got to build a combo to there, so now I'm having like regrowing stuff with like Chain of Vapor. It's like it was way more involved.
Simeon's
and then now it's like, oh cool, like Mana Crypt, Lotus Petal, Dockside, Fastest Oracle Console, GG. So you need a lot less cards, and a lot less pieces to get the job done. So you're able to fit in more chunky cards, which tends to mean higher card quality.
Yeah, and I think also like the other thing that sort of made or the other thing that like makes ad nauseum more problematic now is that we have, I mean, most obviously Thoracle in the format where like Nas is actually pretty, like, it's really not that hard to hate out Nas, right? Like there are lots of effects that, like, even something like a Thalia, like it's real hard to Nas through a Thalia. But like with Thoracle in the format, playing something like a Thalia or a Thorn of Amethyst or Sphere of Resistance, or even potentially something like Trinisphere, doesn't make you safe against like a deck that's really focused around it. Which just, like, I think, sort of going back to what we meant when we said, balance and archetypes being in balance and having a fair chance. I think that my biggest criticism of the way the meta is right now would be that hating on fast decks is not rewarding enough, or like the ratio between its success rate and its and like the requirements to actually do it is a little out of balance.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned like it's easier to hate out, but I feel like it still is on the level of like not easy enough to hate out. Like if Adnos was actual card draw, I'd have no complaints. If it were, I don't know, if it were blue, that might make a difference.
I think one of the annoying things about Adnaz is with the level of fast mana, the fact that it's like maybe if it had more prohibitive color requirements or something, that'd also be nice, because like we have one rule of law at like 1 mana, right? Like there's there's Deafening Silence, and then like at 2 mana you're looking at the Sworn Canonist, and it's like, I mean, the fact that you can cast artifacts is, that's already doing some stuff, but it's, if you're trying to get to rule of law or Archon or Eidolon, it's like you need that 3 mana, and just the way that fast mana is like these decks can be nosing before you're ever getting to your 3 mana stack space. It'd be nice to have, cheaper stack pieces that are good against Nas, that are, maybe not detrimental to their decks. So a bit of asymmetry there.
Well, the leaner you go, unfortunately, like the better they have to be, and the more there has to be of them, because they're just fewer cards in the game. And that's where I think, like, kind of going back to Oracle a bit, like in theory, Wizards could print their way out of Oracle being a problem, but you just have to put so many cards in the game to actually have a consistent way of way of stopping it, that I don't think it's practical.
Yeah. So our last one, discuss. I guess before we wrap it up. So on net, healthy, unhealthy. Where do we stay?
For ad nauseam specifically?
For Adnos,
yeah. I'm more on the healthy side than I am on the unhealthy side.
I think I would say it would be healthy if it didn't sort of exacerbate, or if its strengths weren't sort of amplified by some existing things that are unhealthy on their own.
Yeah. I think it's been, I don't think it's a problem of the card inherently. I think it's a problem of other cards in the format that make me more likely to call Adnaz unhealthy.
Yeah, it's like the best enabler, but
yeah, it's just because I think I enjoyed the aspect of CDH deck building when, optimizing for a Nas was like a real serious thing. Like, I don't know if you remember, Morgan, when I was like talking about, like, there was a race between me and like another frog pilot show to Kibitson for trying to minimize the average CMC and Gitrog.
Yeah,
like,
I remember.
And that was like a big, like, it's like, dude, I managed to shave off like 0.1 CMC from the deck, and I'm winning. It's like that was a really cool time. And that's just not not a requirement anymore.
You just don't need it.
Yeah. So it's too easy. And if something like that's too easy, it's just too easy to slot in your deck and just have it be game winning. I think that's, it's a similar thing with the other Cosmic product. So I'd say probably unhealthy right now, but could be returned to its old status. And cool. So our last card in our kind of like case studies section, we'd said Hermit Druid, although Morgan has mid-show amended the notes to say that Breach, was it Matt, or
that was me? Yeah, but but I'm bringing it up because Morgan said Breach earlier, okay. And I was like, you know what? That's a better, more relevant example. Yeah.
So let's discuss Hermit Druid and Breach in terms of healthy.
Okay, so unhealthy. It is a extremely mana efficient combo, kind of just like Oracle, and also to some extent a card efficient win condition. So that definitely brings it into arguments, and then I think that applies to Breach as well. But unlike Oracle, it has plethora of downsides that can be mitigated through healthy play, like Grave Hate. Though it does have some bonuses by working around, some common stacks elements. But I think the downsides in that regard far outweigh the benefits.
Yeah, and one thing that's nice about Grave Hate, and maybe something that WotC can kind of, or I think would be an interesting design approach, is right now Grave Hate is extremely efficiently costed, right? You can get Tormod's Crypt and like, or if you want to get for one mana Grave Hate, you can also draw cards. They've just stapled Grave Hate randomly onto creatures like Deathrite Shaman, and it's like there's all kinds of efficient, cheap ways to interact with the grave. So it's like if Breach was to ever become much bigger of a problem than it is now, and maybe like on the tier of Thoracle or whatever, it's like people can adapt. People can adapt quite easily. It's like, I mean, even during Flash Hulk meta, the only reason that we even had a meta kind of at all then was because there was efficient Grave Hate to give people a chance. Like if the only way we could interact with Flash Hulk was like 3 CMC stacked pieces, it's like that's just dope. But I think
much what we need is like a 0 mana artifact that cracks, prevent ETBs, and then we get Oracle and Dockside out of the way.
Now, a 0 mana artifact that cracks to be a temporary rule of law. For one turn, you can crack it to be a rule of law.
Instant speed rule of laws. I love that.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of just something that maybe we'll see down the line for the current problematic cards. But yeah, as you're saying, Breach, Hermit Druid, they're fast, they can be compact and high card quality, but ultimately very interactable. And I think when there is that room for being interactable, that leads to interesting adjustments in people's decks, and the meta is able to kind of self-correct and adjust without being heavily skewed.
They create archetypes. Like they create the fast deck archetype, and they don't necessarily go against the healthy play patterns. So
yeah, it's nice when in order to be a particular archetype like a fast deck, you have to make some kind of concession. It's like, I have to, for Hermit Druid, I can't run any basics, and I have to include this package for whatever, and it's like, lol, why would I do that when I can just run whatever and just win super fast without having to include a bunch of dead cards. Okay, yes, yeah, that is ideal. Yeah, Morgan, do you have anything to say about Hermit Druid / Breach?
I actually think that Breach is like healthy enough on its own. I think that it's like I kind of put it in a similar bucket with Ad Nauseam, where like the pivots in the decks that are taking advantage of it are like a little bit too strong. But as a combo, while it is mana efficient and like easy to set up, it has a lot of surfaces to interact with, right? Like you don't even need a hard rule of law. Something like Thalia will shut down most of those combos. You don't, like Grave Hate hits it. Almost always Artifact
enchantment removal
hits it. Removal hits it.
That's the best part.
Like I think that's
removal doesn't necessarily hit it though. It depending on
depends
like,
on the removal.
The fact that they,
depends
like
on
if they have pact
negation.
Have you ever tried to remove a Breach with a pact negation in the graveyard, dude? That's
oh
awesome.
My god, yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, obviously you just need more removal than like counter spells don't work. But other than like most Breach combos, don't have like a super stacked graveyard. Like, obviously, you know, you played Riel, Linden, and that deck was like slow enough and also looted enough that you actually
that deck is insane.
You'd like, when you played Breach, you'd have like 20 cards in your graveyard, but like a lot of Breaches are looking at like 6 or 7 cards initially, so like maybe that buys them one piece of protection. And like, you know, there's obviously cards like Abrupt Decay, and now to a lesser extent Boseiju.
Boseiju is tight.
Or I guess maybe
Breach.
not to a lesser extent, to an equal extent Boseiju.
Yeah.
That like can get around that. So there's definitely a lot of, compared to something like Oracle Consult, where it's like you need to hate out ETBs, you need a hard rule of law, or you need a counter spell, or like one of like the 3 ways that put cards back in their deck. Was like a very narrow set of things to actually do against it, and I think that the set of things to do against Breach is broad enough that I don't really think it's much of a problem.
So that's it for all of our listed case studies. Is there any other cards that have come to mind, or that you think are kind of unique? I mean, I brought up Soul Ring and Mana Crypt. I guess they're kind of similar points for Dockside. I think at pre-show we had mentioned like free counter magic. But I mean, honestly, that could almost be that could almost be an entire show.
You also notably missed Mystic Remora and Mystic Study.
True.
Are good case studies.
Maybe we'll have to just do another episode or do a mini topic on another episode where we delve into more of these. But I think this is pretty good for the time being.
Yeah.
So yeah, that wraps up our main topic, and now we can move on to everyone's favorite segment, Gut Check.
Good check.
Gotcha.
Woo. So last episode, I'd come up with a terrible gut check, and then I was able to swap it last minute for something better because of a listener question. So now we're going back to the terrible one. I'm sorry, but this was relevant more last episode when I think I've gotten like whatever. Okay, so the gut check question is, what is the best fast food burger? Because I got the burger last time, and I was like, I wonder what the other guys think. This is the best food burger.
I already wrote it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna go with a Canadian. So this is also like very specific to regions, because it's like if we were in California, you know, they've got In-N-Out or Shake Shack or Whataburger and like all the different, you know, regions of the state. So I mean, it's hard to compare those, but you know, I'll throw for myself. I'm a big fan of a Canadian chain called Harvey's.
Harvey's is definitely good.
Burgers are pretty cool.
The Angus.
Yeah, no, the Angus is legit.
So there just is nothing quite like eating a giant beef cube, and that's why when I get my burger, I get it at Wendy's.
Nice.
And I always get the triple. Even it's like the one fast food size that's been constant my whole life. Like I feel like I've been slowly downgrading and just eating less food as my metabolism, you know, isn't quite what it was like when I was 12. But Wendy's, it's like there's nothing, like a double would not satisfy me.
Mentioning Wendy's is bringing up the memory from when we all lived together of when we went to Wendy's. And then you and Morgan were like, yeah, let's go to Popeyes.
Let's go to Popeyes.
That was
that
was the best decision.
I'm happy I left. Yeah, that was a worthwhile dream to live.
So Morgan, what is your choice?
Dude, I'm going to A&W.
I don't think I can't remember a time I've ever eaten at A&W.
Dude, they're like whatever the like smallest burger they serve is called has caramelized onions on it, and that's like,
whoa, yo, that's premium.
Exactly. It's like I'm a simple man.
True.
Dude, that sounds like a complex man take. I don't know what you're talking about. I just want my onions to be nice and gelatinous and
Caramelized,
sweet.
yeah.
Like,
The real thing is like, yeah, this is this was like our favorite fast food burger, I guess, in terms of quality, but like, dude, if you're looking in terms of value, dude, you can't beat the McDouble. Dollar menu
yeah,
pick.
it's still good,
Dude,
even though the price is
edible, yeah.
essentially
the
doubled.
dollar menu actually just causes me
Yeah.
pain now
The
because everything's like
$2.30 menu.
$2.
Yeah. True.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it,
Yeah, no, it
but
really
they still
doesn't.
call it the
I
dollar
think they call it
store.
like the value menu or whatever because they can't. Okay.
You know
So
what? That
that's
turned
it
out
for
to be
my
greater.
terrible gut check. I'm interested to see what I actually want the listeners to because right now we've been doing like gut check polls. You can vote on. It's like I'm interested to hear what other people's like prime choice of fast food burger is because you know it's definitely regional and maybe there'll be some hidden gems. So next time I'm traveling,
Actually, just trying to start a literal war.
Yeah, does sound like a holy war.
Yeah.
All right, next time we're gonna talk about your favorite sub.
Whataburger and In-N-Out trash tier. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, agreed.
We're gonna go hear that. We're gonna hear about that one. So from our listener questions, we have 2 questions for this episode. So classic side part asks, I absolutely enjoy Rakdos Turbo Shenanigans and Dargo Tavesh will always be my favorite deck. However, I kind of feel that Rakdos strategies are in a really tough spot at the moment. Being light on stack interaction and crumbling in the presence of stacks effects, I've had a really tough time lately. Would you agree, or is it possible to adjust to such a meta and still keep the turbo nature?
So, I mean, I think that to an extent, you know, we're talking about a 2-color combination here. So there's always going to be an extent to which it's going to struggle with some things that, like, you know, 4-color, you know, red-black is going to struggle with things that maybe green-blue, red-black can adapt itself to a little bit more easily. And
yeah, I mean, even then, like Turbo is already making that trade-off, and then you're also playing low colors, so
yeah. I will say that, like, at least in the last few years they printed, like, what are we up to, like 3 or 4 now black spells that can theoretically let you kill enchantments, so you have like some sort of out to things like Rule of Law, which have typically been like almost impossible to actually answer in your colors. So that's, you know, something you might look towards including, you know, a Feed the Swarm or Farika's Libation or whatever. I think there might even be a new one. So, like, you know, it's always possible to tech at least somewhat. But I think, yeah, if your meta is just super full of Rule of Law, it's going to be difficult because you're playing a strategy that's already not good into Rule of Law, and you're in a low color combination, which limits the possibility to adapt it.
Yeah, well said. I actually I've definitely lost count on the black spells that can deal with jam. Black command spells that can deal with jam.
Oh, like they printed that one. I was like, oh wow, and then all of a sudden,
Apparently there's 4.
Something like that. I think there's at least 3.
Okay, so I guess my take on Rakdos is like it kind of is. There's only so much that you can adjust and metagame for without just completely compromising your strategy and what makes your deck like whatever little advantages you have of being in like, you know, low color. You generally want to lean into your strengths and not try and, you know, change too much to accommodate for the meta because it doesn't end up working out well that often if you cut back the one thing you're good at, and then, you know, now maybe you're able to deal with stacks a bit more, but, you know, other decks have different or the higher color you are, the more you have to fall back. Generally. So yeah, I mean, I would kind of just take your lumps and find the spots for the removal or slight ways you can change it, generally, where you can't do anything too significant. So that's it for that listener question, and then our next one comes to us from Speg, and Speg asks, if Oracle, Consult, or both was banned, do you think the format would noticeably slow down? Would there be a resurgence of Doomsday, Scepter, Twin, etc.? Or would everyone gravitate towards Najeela and Turbonos decks? So pretty thematic, I guess, for this episode, talking about Oracle and Consult and being banned. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I definitely don't think everyone would play Turbonos decks. I guess that's the easiest part of the question to answer.
The opposite might happen. People would probably stop playing their Turbonos decks.
Well, I mean, a lot of Turbonos decks aren't even in blue, but I think it just makes it so much more appealing to play anti-Turbonos hate. Like, oof decks just become so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just it narrows down what you're able to hate out, and so it becomes much more appealing to play. Like, the current tier of stacks decks, it's you have to be playing a wide variety to be able to nip all the popular strategies, right? But if it can just be like, if Null Rod is the only piece that you need to hate out turbo decks, and you hate out basically every strategy, then there's a lot more decks that can play Null Rod and don't also have to play Rule of Law. Or I think that'd be more interesting, and probably wouldn't result in more people picking up Turbonos necessarily.
Yeah, and also on the point of going back to like Doomsday and Scepter, Twin, that type of thing, I actually don't think that we lean back onto those. Like, there's a lot of options besides those now these days. Like just creature-based combos are really strong and also fast. Breach is still quite viable. Like, I don't know, maybe of all of those options we'd see Scepter, but it definitely wouldn't be some immediate swap, that's for sure.
Well, I think you just wouldn't see Doomsday if Thor's Oracle was banned.
Yeah, I think it's Doomsday's with like Labman is just harder to pull off than like a lot of other
that's a single
combos.
Or a 60 card format combo for sure.
Doomsday is at all time efficient. Like, Doomsday has never been better in terms of the strength of the card, of like its strength, but it's no one's playing. Like the current requirements for Doomsday to win with Thoracle, I think, are Brainstorm, Gataxian Probe, Lotus Petal, and like a Mox Diamond or Chromox and Thoracle.
Or a land,
so, like,
possibly even.
If you can fit those cards into your deck, then you can win with Doomsday. And nobody's doing it. So.
I mean, a few people are doing it, but yeah, I think Scepter, it's hard to say on Scepter because, like, if my prediction of like oof meta comes real, then Scepter is like not super appealing. So it is a combo that, assuming you're going Scepter into activated ability of a creature as your outlet with something like Thrasios, that does get hit by almost, like, it gets hit by a lot, right? You get hit by things like Drannith Magistrate, you get hit by Rule of Laws, you get hit by Artifact Hate and Creature Hate. But it is like, I mean, it is still a 4-mana colorless combo with a board state, or like board requirements that are typically very easy. So it's certainly possible we'd see it in some decks, maybe like some of the faster decks that are trying to still trying to go fast, because it's also the fact that it is colorless makes it very appealing as a post Nas option, because it's just so much easier to power it out. Like, I mean, Crypt obviously, but then like even things like Mana Vault, Grim Monolith to a lesser extent. There's a lot of ways of netting a lot of colorless mana, which makes Scepter a very appealing combo. in that sort of scenario. But it's also much easier to hate out, so I don't know if that would be where people went.
It's only been easier to hate it out, to be honest. Like
though I guess like
Neoform, Eldritch Evolution, those types of decks, like
generally you're not casting Nas into Scepter hate anyways. Like if there's a Null Rod or whatever, you're probably like not on the Nas plan anyways, so maybe it's not actually that big of a deal to put it in your Nas decks, though I think those might decline in popularity a bit.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I think actually Doomsday would get more popular because Renzo, power level wise, would finally be a little bit stronger.
Dude, Grenzo not bad, man. It's got, I mean, the kid's bad, but it's got some redeeming characteristics I like about it. And I know for a while, like I maintained a Grenzo list like online that I would kind of like tinker with every now and then, because I like had some differences between like what I saw on the, I don't even know if it was a database at the time, like the sidebar on the subreddit. But now like, you know, I think people are kind of getting to Grenzo's in a much better place. But yeah, sad that it's not no longer the menace it kind of was, as like the fastest deck. Times have changed.
I mean, I'm not sure it was ever actually the fastest deck.
No, but it had that reputation. It didn't have the no, maybe I'm just thinking of Reed's Viral's primer with the guy with the like the race suit or whatever. On tapped out. Okay. That about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email, intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/intothenorthpodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description. A portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for lovely podcast music, and Nate Slubber for equally lovely podcast logo, and for our video editor, Nate Raker. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Till then.